Promise family. It is good to be here today and be able to share something with you across the internet waves and through YouTube and all of the technology that's available to us. Promise Community Church here in Albuquerque. We're a small church, and so all of this is new, getting out on the internet and recording our sermons. All of it's new for us. But God just is an amazing God, and He helps us adapt and overcome these issues. And so we're giving Him the praise for it, and I'm thanking my brother Zach for putting it all together and editing it and posting it out there for us this morning. But so today it is good to be with you, at least by virtual church, and I'm praying that you are enjoying these sermons in your living room. Perhaps you're still in your jammies watching this, I don't know, but don't enjoy that too long, because the church is going to open again. We will open soon, I hope, but you can't come to church in your jammies, so enjoy it right now as you have the time, but soon you'll be putting on your Sunday best and heading back over here, and we will be fellowshipping together, I am sure. But I pray that we don't go back to normal. I heard a sermon this week about a pastor talking just about that we should not go back to the way things were, that God has challenged us through these times to be creative and to be thinking of ways to share the gospel with so many around us. So I'm praying that God has put something in your heart and in your mind, maybe a new ministry, a new way to approach, whatever it is. I'm sure God has used this time in your life to change you. And so I'm anxious to hear about all the stories of what God has done for you. So just to give you a heads up, when we do finally meet together, I was thinking of this, is we're going to spend some time in testimony. I want to hear from you what God has been doing through your life through these days, how He's challenged you and stretched you and tested you and perhaps even chiseled and worked on you a little bit. So be thinking of those stories and things that you would like to share. This is a very special day for us as we celebrate Mother's Day, and man, we just can't thank our moms enough, our grandmoms, all of those in our life who played that role, who had that part. So I know we just started our walk through the book of Judges, but I'm going to take just a short break from it this morning and talk to our moms. Because we love you, we appreciate you in our lives and all that you have done, and we are praying that you are blessed in this special day for you. I read a quote this week that said, any woman can be a mother, but it takes someone special to be a mom. And so I want you to know that the fact that that God trusted you and really gifted you with the birth of a child and trusted you to carry and nurture that human in your life, with your life and with its life, and then you gave birth to that child, and then you raised that child. All of that is just a wonderful calling, I believe, from God. And we want you to know that, especially as a father, as men, I'm glad it was you and not me that had to give birth, because it looked like there's a lot of pain involved. And I know that dads have their part too, but listen, it's not Father's Day. That's next month, and they'll get their dose then. But moms are unique, and you think about it, not all moms actually went through childbirth to become a mom. Some were married in, some were adopted in, some were so close to a child that they were considered their mom or called mom. So no matter how you got that title, the job comes along, and hopefully it has brought you more joy than it has sorrows. Listen, it is always a task for me as a father, as a preacher, to come up with a fitting Mother's Day message, because, well, I'm not a mom, and I really don't want to make this particular group angry at me, so I have to tread lightly, and I'm always warned, do not, whatever you do, preach on Proverbs 31. So if you would, turn in your Bibles to Proverbs 31. No, I'm just kidding, don't do that. I'm told that woman does not exist, and so I will steer clear of that, not to risk my life. I won't be preaching on Proverbs 31. But I was reading this week a chapter in the Bible that you know well. It's Hebrews 11, and it's usually called the By Faith chapter. And there was a verse that was in there that really stuck to me, that struck me, and I had to sort of investigate it. And usually when that happens, that means that's the passage that the Lord wants me to preach on. But you're familiar with this chapter, so if you would make your way to Hebrews chapter 11, that's where we're going to be for a little bit of time this morning. And you're familiar with it. It records for us many of the, I guess you could say, heroes of the faith, or many of the things that were done by faith. Those two words, by faith, are going to be key in this chapter. But before we get to those, in verse 1, it defines for us what is, or what faith is. In chapter 11, verse 1, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and the conviction or the evidence of things not seen. And we're going to see how this practically then starts to play out by verse 3, because then you get all of these things that happen by faith, by faith, by faith. And there is just something in common with those and all the things that they did by faith. They all were able to tap into something that was far greater than themselves. Maybe even sometimes in circumstances that they didn't understand why they were happening or what was going on, but they trusted, or they knew they had this faith that they were able to continue on and press on and accomplish what the Scripture reports for us. They couldn't touch it. They couldn't see it. They couldn't see it in front of them. But their faith, as recorded for us, drove their actions to move in such a way that, as we see, God honored it and God blessed it. I wonder this morning, Mom, do you have a by faith testimony, a by faith event in your life, a time in your life where you didn't know the outcome, you were stuck in some sort of circumstance, or you were just trusting God for the day-to-day stuff that you were doing, the day-to-day things you were trying to teach your child, all of it, and all of this by faith you trusted, and God then moved in your life. I don't know if we could ever fully understand God, if we could fully grasp and comprehend what God's will is for our life if we never step by faith. If it all is by what you see and taste and touch and smell, your faith will be very limited and very shaky and very weak. Faith takes us out into the unknown. It builds a level of trust in God for our lives and for the lives of the things that we are praying for, in this case, our children. One of the verses, though, that really caught my mind in this passage is where I want to share some time this morning, and that is in chapter 11 and verse 23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. That one verse stuck out in my mind. It sort of piqued my interest to look into this a little bit deeper this morning. And so that's where we're going to spend our time today, and I pray that you find this useful, Mom. And of course, for the rest of us by ourselves, we need to live more by faith as well. So in order to investigate this, we've got to go all the way back into the Old Testament, and we're going to go all the way back to Exodus. So go all the way back to Exodus chapter 1 as we share together and look into the birth of Moses and what all that took place there. We know just from reading this account, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, what was going on in the times, in that culture. The Pharaoh obviously is now wanting to oppress Israel and oppress the Israelites. They have increased in the land. They have obviously grown in size and in number, and the Pharaoh feels threatened that if they were to rise up, they would destroy him. So he orders, or he decrees, that all of the newborn male children now are to be killed. They must be taken at birth and tossed into the Nile from the midwife, the one who receives that child. is to take that child, if it's a male, and throw it into the Nile to kill it. I want you to just try and wrap your mind around the stress or the anxiety or the fear of that day to become pregnant and then to know, wow, there's a 50-50 chance that this child could be a boy and it could be taken from me. Imagine, if you would, that birth moment, that moment that child comes out and is delivered, and this midwife then takes this child from you in order to throw it to its death. It would probably be a horrifying event. You carried this child full term. You delivered this baby, and maybe deep down you were probably hoping that it was a girl so that it would not be threatened. And if it was discovered to be that boy, you knew what would happen. This was the law that they were living under at the time. And as we can see, though, thankfully, not everybody was on board with the law. Look at in chapter 1, verse 15. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Siphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives, now watch this, verse 17, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? And let male children live. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and grew very strong, and because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. Wow. What a crazy law. What a crazy time to be living under in those days. But notice that the midwives, when they came to the Hebrew children, or the Hebrew moms in labor, had a different approach. They feared God. And because of their fear for God, because they knew that this king's decree was murder, he was telling them basically to commit murder on these infants, they feared God greater than that. And so they disobeyed that order. And God obviously blesses them for it. He dealt well, as verse 20 says, with them. And so all this is happening, this is going on, and here we have a pregnancy that goes and takes us into chapter 2. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife, a Levite woman. So obviously this is talking about Moses' father and Moses' mother. His father's name was Amram, his mother's name was Jochebed. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and dabbed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant women, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the girl went and called his child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, because she said, I drew him out of the water. Isn't that an amazing event? An amazing start to a life. But I want to talk to you more so about before that life. What happens in the few months and years of before this child is weaned and brought back into Pharaoh's daughter. Man, I want to tell you, moms, this connects to, obviously, our Hebrews passage. By faith. By faith, all of this happened. And I think, I would hope that you would agree with me, moms, that a lot of what you do or did from conception on was done by and with faith. In other words, from day one when you know you have conceived a child, from day one you start having hopes and dreams for this baby, and then it continues to grow, and you can feel it, and you can hear the heartbeat nowadays, all of these things, and you're just mulling all this over and the future plans and what you would love for this child to be, whether it's a girl or a boy, and then the process of birth itself, going through that pain and all of that just to give birth to this child. And suddenly when that child is placed up on your chest, all that pain just kind of magically disappears, at least for a minute. Then you care for this child. You care for this thing that just constantly eats and sleeps and poops. But it's what God has given you, and it's by faith that you receive it, and by faith that you start to now raise this child. You have hopes. But listen, it's good to have hope, but what about your assurance? What about your confidence in what is to come? Where does that come from? If, according to Hebrews 11, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and the conviction or the evidence of things that are unseen, where does that come from? Those two words, assurance and conviction, are very, very key to understanding this. Literally, assurance means to stand under a guaranteed agreement. Notice that. Assurance is to stand under a guaranteed agreement. Conviction is the inner proof that God gives to confirm it. I know Hebrews 11 says that it was his parents, plural, that did this. And I'm sure Dad had to be on board with it. But here in Exodus, we get more details. And as you would assume, Mom did the work. What I want you to see, though, this morning is that much of what she did, maybe if not all of what she did, was done by faith. The first demonstration that I see of that is actually in the choice to become pregnant in the first place. We know that Jochebed had 2 other children before Moses. He has a sister, an older sister named Miriam, and an older brother named Aaron. And Aaron, of course, is beyond the newborn law, so he would not be killed. So any further children would be born under this law, under this intense time. And so the actual choice to become pregnant in the first place is done by faith, I would say. We know that pregnancies just don't happen. We know what causes them. And since we have no indication that this was unwanted or if it was forced or a rape or anything like that, they wanted another child. And they were willing to, by faith, take that risk under these laws. Just the act of this was a roll of the dice. A hope. Maybe it was a hope that it would be another girl and they wouldn't have to worry about it. Maybe it was a hope that the midwife, whoever attended their birth, wouldn't be the one who would snitch them out or kill the child itself. Jochebed is taking a huge risk in becoming pregnant under a time like this, where times are hard, where laws were oppressive, and the economy was rough. Listen, maybe you're listening to this and you are contemplating getting pregnant. Maybe you're praying about, is it time right now? Is this a good time? Is it ever a good time to bring a child into the world? You see the times around you, the signs of the times, a fearful time perhaps, and You wonder, what is this child, what would they grow up into? What kind of world, what kind of a culture, what kind of society would be happening? I can't answer that question for you. My only counsel would be to ask you, what is God saying in your heart? And what is God saying in your husband's heart? Are you guys both at peace about this decision, about bringing a child into this world? If you are, then I say, go for it. By faith, Jochebed decides it's time. You know how many things can go wrong? Even if all those laws were not in place, even if this was just a normal time where they could have babies, just in the process of conception and growth inside the womb, all of the things that can mechanically go wrong in that growth process. If you've already had a child, if you could remember back when your OB doc came in and started talking to you about risks and tests and defects and handicaps, all of those sorts of things can become overwhelming. You don't know what's going on inside of there. There's so much risk, you could say, to it. The hardest part is, I guess, is those risks are out of control, out of your control. You can't control it. You are praying, you are hoping by faith that God is going to weave this child together perfectly inside of you for the day of its birth. I remember when my wife was pregnant with our boys, our docs did the same probably. They did for you. They offered you tests. They offered you ways to identify maybe some defects or things that could be going on, some risks perhaps. But they would always explain that the tests themselves were a risk to the baby and to the mom at times. We had to come to a decision. We had to come to a choice in this. What were we going to do? Ultimately, we trusted that we didn't want those tests because we didn't want to put the baby, the embryo, at a risk. And so we said, you know what? Basically, God, you know what's best. You're going to give us what is best. I can hope and trust and believe in what I would like to see happen, but I've got to remember, all of that is just a request from God. You see, by faith, doesn't mean that I always get what I'm asking for. No, by faith means I'm going to step out in what I think the plan is, and I'm going to trust that if it's right and if it's in God's will, that He is going to bless it and honor it. And if it's not, then He is going to change it. But either way, by faith, I'm going to move in that direction. If Jochebed lived in a constant state of fear of her world, of her circumstances, of her economy, of the Pharaoh himself, we might not have ever had Moses, who would go on to make tremendous changes in the world. It was by faith that they even first decided to have this child. Notice then, when Moses is born, what does she do? She looks at him and saw that he was a fine child. Literally in the Hebrew it means that he was beautiful. Now, of course, every mom would think that, right? But in those days, if you did have a newborn that was beautiful, good looks, all of those sorts of things, it meant that you were blessed or you were favored by God for something good. And this child would go on to do something good since God had blessed it with good looks. Now, thinking about this, some of us, perhaps in the moment of our birth, well, we were favored by God with good looks, and some others, well, maybe not, but that's okay. God still is using all of us, despite how we look. But it was by faith that she wanted another child. And next, note this, that it is by faith that she keeps this child and she nourishes it for 3 months. This is a protective kind of faith, isn't it? She trusted that since God had blessed her with this good-looking child, that He must want this child to live. And He must have great plans for her and for him along the way. And so she chooses to hide out and protect this child. Imagine that, moms. You have to, first 3 months, I mean, we talk about the lockdown from the virus, but could you imagine being locked down in this sense for 3 months without even letting that child outside, anything like that? For 3 months she held him secretly in her home. Funny, talking about this lockdown and children being home these days. I saw a meme, I think it was, or something that said, "I know you lied when you said it was a joy to have my child in your class." And I'm figuring out that a lot of moms and dads are understanding a little bit more about their own children and how perhaps they have been acting in school. But Jochebed has this faith, doesn't she? She has this faith that God is going to protect him, and that as he grows and will grow on to be a healthy boy, that there is some purpose for him. Don't all moms have these thoughts? Didn't you have those thoughts when you gave birth to your child? Maybe you're thinking about all of the future things that you want to do with this child, or maybe even the potential of what they will become. Then you stare into this child's eyes and you are looking at this thing face to face, and you wonder, wow, what will they be? What will they become? What will they do? I have these moments with my grandson. I mean, he's just a little peanut right now. And I look into his face and into his eyes, and I just think, wow, what is this guy going to do? I'm praying that he is the kind of guy that goes out and changes the world for the better. But you nurture them by faith. You trust in God's word by faith. You trust that if you do things like training up this child in the way that he should go or she should go, that according to God's word, that he will do his part in not letting them depart from it, according to Proverbs 22:6. And moms, you know that you only have a window of time to do this in. They know that someday you're going to have to let this child go into the world. But it is by faith that you teach them and you train them. And you know to teach them and train them to trust in this same God, that when it comes time for them to be on their own, they will remember. Leads me to my third observation of this text. By faith she becomes pregnant. By faith she protects. Third, by faith she prepares. Look at verse 3 of the text in Exodus. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and dabbed it with bitumen and pitch, and she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. She knows that she can no longer hide this child. She knows that it's time to let him go. He must go on. He must go on to do something more, and she prepares the way for that to happen. She has a plan, doesn't she? Mostly like you, moms. As you're raising this child up, you're planning and preparing for their future. Well, what did Jochebed do? She had a plan as well. She did some recon. She obviously knew that Pharaoh's daughter would be coming down to the river to bathe. She perhaps saw that happen over a period of time and knew that at this certain time she would be there. I don't think Jochebed just willy-nilly threw the kid out there into the Nile and let the current take him down. No, she knew exactly the time that Pharaoh's daughter would come. And so what does she do? She makes this basket, and she makes sure that it will float. You can't send your baby out onto the Nile in some flimsy little basket. He'll be sure to drown, right? And so she takes time to weave every branch. Imagine that, Mom, if you had to put together some sort of a float or a raft or something like that you were going to have to put your 3-month-old child into a river on. How detailed would you be? How sure would you be that every branch was weaved perfectly and every portion, every nook and cranny was coated with these materials, and they were used to waterproof it, the same materials that Noah used on the ark. All of this takes time. All of it is a process, every detail thought through. She puts the time in because she knows that somehow or someday he will be out of her hands, and faith will prevail. Maybe you too have invested time and money and teaching and prayer into your child. Maybe you wonder if you've done enough or are doing enough. One thing that I can assure you is this, that if you are training up this child in the things of God according to His Word, you are giving them the best chance. You're giving them the best foundation that you could ever teach them. If you can train them to love God first and show them how to do that in your own life, then guess what? You are preparing them for all that life will ever throw at them. You cannot control it. You cannot control what life will bring to your child, whether it'll bring sickness or breakups or peer pressures or dating or college. You can't control it. All of it someday will be out of your control. And someday, you, like Jochebed, will have to place that child in what you have prepared and send them out. Someday, you will have to take your hand off that basket, knowing that they will be at the mercy of the currents. And all you will have left is this: by faith. I can remember the times when our boys left our homes. That first full day of being alone in the house, you do wonder, you do question yourself. Did I do everything that I could have or should have? But ultimately it comes down to those two words: by faith. By faith, she desires the child. By faith, she protects the child. By faith, she prepares this child. And finally, I want you to notice, because of her faith, God honors her life. The plan works, doesn't it? His sister sees that the baby floats by the perfect spot at the perfect time, because God's plan is perfect. And this child is discovered by Pharaoh's daughter, and she wants to keep him. His sister just happens to be there on the inside and offers to find a mother to nurse him. I'm sure she had somebody in mind. It is agreed upon, and we see that not only that happened, not does Jochebed get her baby back, but also now she even gets paid wages to nurse her own son. What a sweet deal that is. God honored this. God honored the plan. God honored her faith by making all of these details. You think about all the things that could have gone wrong in that plan. What if the current took it a different way? What if there was an alligator waiting underneath the water? What if all of these things, what if she missed one little tiny hole in that little basket and it sunk and he drowned? All the what ifs. Maybe you, Mom, you have what ifs. You're thinking of what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? It's okay to have those. But what also you need that overcomes all that is by faith. Listen, Mom, wherever you are in this story, I pray that you are trusting God by faith. No matter if you have a little one still at home or your little one is grown to a big one and they're out there in the world, wherever they are, you are trusting God by faith. You're trusting that this child that He gave to you is in His hands. And whatever that currently looks like, whether it's favorable or unfavorable in the moment, whatever they are up to in these days, that God has a plan and that plan is perfect. I love how James puts it in his letter. In the 2nd chapter, he talks to us about Abraham and his faith. And he talks to us about how Abraham combined his faith and his actions in the moment that he was about to sacrifice his son. And in James 2:22 it says, you see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. It's an interesting word, completed. Some versions say perfected. It is a word that describes something that gets clearer and clearer as you extend out towards it, or as you get closer to it. One of the analogies, or one of the things to think about, is like a pirate's telescope, that as the telescope extends, whatever the object is that they're looking at the distance becomes clearer and clearer. And so what does that mean here? Well, Jochebed combined her faith. She combined her faith to action. And as she did this, God's plan and his will became clearer and clearer, which then in return completed her faith, or perfected her faith. Listen, Mom, as you do this, as you walk by faith, as you teach your children to walk by faith, the clarity that comes and the trust that comes will bring an unmatching strength to your faith. And in those moments where you know that child's out there in the world, or they're at their first party, or wherever they are, they stepped out of that house, you're out of control in that circumstance. Your faith is all you have left. And the more that you trust God, the more that you combine your faith with your actions and teach your children how to do that, the clearer it becomes, the more complete your faith becomes, and the more you trust God. Teach your children manners, yes. Teach them responsibility, yes. But never neglect the greatest thing that they will ever need. That is to walk by faith. Well, Father, I'm thanking you for your word this morning. And I'm thanking you, Lord, that you have given us tremendous women who have gone on and done great things in their lives, one of which perhaps is to birth a child. Father, I'm thanking you that you didn't leave them on their own, that you didn't just say, here you go, and never promised to help, never promised to be there, never promised to move and to act. And I know of so many moms, Father, whose children are out there in the world, or whose children are growing up in their house, and there's just so much unknown, and so much perhaps pressure, or so much anxiety, or even fear of what lies ahead. And if they're making the right choices, if they're teaching them the right things, Lord, I would pray that you would just calm all that down in their life. You would calm all that down to a moment of peace, even in this moment, to know that if they're doing it by faith, if they're teaching them to walk by faith in you, then that is the greatest thing that they could ever teach them. Father, I'm thanking you for this. I'm praying, Lord, for those children that are out there in the world. I pray that they are walking and living by faith, Father. Only you have control over all of this. So give these moms peace in their heart. Give these moms just an understanding that these children are in your hands. Oh, Lord, we give you praise for this. In Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Well, Mom, I pray that you're blessed today. I pray that all that was said brings you a peace and a strength in your heart. And if you are in fear, or if you are troubled about something and you just want somebody to talk to, or just to pray with, of course you can always contact us here at Promise Community Church. You can contact me by email, pastortoddnm@gmail.com. And of course, we continue to extend any help if you need help during this virus, during this pandemic. If you're needing food or something more specific, please contact me on that email. And we'll do our best to try and help you as best as we can. we're praying that this is all over soon. We can come back together as a family, see each other face to face, give that promised hug, and be able to fellowship once again. Well, moms, we love you. Pray that you have a blessed day. Thank you for watching.